Welcome all, and this is the last session for the day. So, obviously, we hope to keep your attention, and we'll try and keep it very relevant and obviously short. So, the session essentially talks about how 5G test beds are going to evolve, and how are we going to make sure the technologies are taken from the lab to the actual field, where we actually get to see the benefits. With me, I have some very experienced panelists. We have Mohan from Samsung. We have uh, Mr. Hardeep from Qualcomm. We have Jobi George from Keysight Technologies, and we have Subhas Mondal from HFCL, all renowned personalities in their own right. So, without further ado, we'll begin for the session. My first question goes to Subhas. Subhas, we had the commercial launch of 5G yesterday, and with this now, we heard the PM speak, and we have been hearing all speakers since yesterday that this is a new era of communications going forward. Now, there are some things that the government has done. What all do you believe the government needs to do further, and how can the industry support it going forward in terms of developing test beds for future technologies?
Yeah, so I'm little bit struggling to hear the question because I think the audibility here is little bit of a challenge. So if you don't mind, can you just repeat the last part?
Okay, I think with the, there are some initial steps that the government has already taken.
Right, right.
And what do you believe that the government should do further?
Right, right.
And how can the industry support it to make
Right.
this, the vision of having more test beds and supporting more technology?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Rahul. So I just must say that government has done a tremendous job in terms of creating a test bed. I think the 5G test bed that was created in collaboration with academic institutes, 8 of them, it really acted as an impetus to create the technology capability, R&D capability. So if you really look at India as a country, India traditionally has been the IT capital, and a lot of IT work gets done out of India. So one of the area that was lacking really is the ability to create product R&D and create product indigenously. And that is the impetus, I think, that created with the seed funding that government gave. And in terms of the outcome that has come in today, if you look at it, India created the 5G standard called 5G-I. Of course, it is part of the mainstream 3GPP specification in release 17 now. Of course, it has started, journey had started some time back. Definitely, the funding that was given by government has accelerated the progress, culminating into a standard that is ratified for low mobility large cell, one of the Indian use cases. So, creating the standard, of course, is a significant step for the country in defining technology and having its voice in the global standard. The second thing that I see is that a set of prototype, I would say, that was created in the test bed. While there was no direct funding given to the industry, a lot of industry partners have partnered with this 5G test bed. And I personally have been involved into a couple of test beds right from the inception. And I can tell you that the way the academics have transformed to create something that is meaningful and it can see the light of the day in the form of a product, that mindset. Professors are typically academicians, so engineering the product is not something that they naturally are used to because academic cycles are quite different. Now, the third part I would like to say is that dissemination of those testbed utilities created, how does the ecosystem, the startups, or the SMS, that small medium enterprises consume that technology to create a product? And to your second part of the question, what could government do further? I think is that a closed ecosystem where the producer and consumers are brought in together, that essentially says that, okay, academicians give the technology support, the startup and the other indigenous companies take that and then create the product, And then also a customer comes in and says that, hey, here is the requirement. If you meet that, then I buy your product. So if this closed loop is created, I think it will help the ecosystem. So with that, I will pause.
Oh, very well, said. Now the second one, I'll give to Jobi. So Jobi, we are all aware 5G applications and infrastructure require, extensive testing at very exacting standards. And with the customization that is happening in the equipment, probably need to comply to a certain set of standards as well. So how far have we come across in this journey?
Yeah. Thanks, Rahul. So, 5G testing is really complex. So, you can see that we have moved from the radio technology, also, we have moved from normal radio to the millimeter wave. It's really complex. And we have the standard bodies, SDOs like 3GPP, who is creating the standard and according to the ITU vision. So we are in the stage of release 17 now. So we had the last, in the March, we had the release 17 got released. So if you see, the standard creation is one important thing, and along with that, creating the test labs, enabling the test lab along with that is going to help the device manufacturers and even the operators to ensure that the whole ecosystem work very smoothly. So if you see, the standard is keep evolving. Like we started the 5G with the triangles, three vertex, like EMBB as the enhanced mobile broadband as an enhancement of LTE, and that was only data throughput focusing. Now, if you see, we just achieved the 5G on that part, but the next one is coming. The release 17 is now URL LLC. That is the latency part. So TSN networks and other things we need to still evolve, and the test equipments for that to be evolved and standard to be evolved. So it is very complex, and the next one is going to be on parallel line. Maybe a massive machine type communication is what the next in the 5G. So this is in the 5G advanced. We are still working on these 5G technologies, and the standard is keep evolving. And this is also making it complex for all the device manufacturers, all the ecosystem to get it tested also. So I think in test and measurement industry, Keysight has almost all the equipments for testing, from the device to ORAN, RU, DU, and CU, and again in the network, all the testing. So this is kind of environment we need to make for making sure that the standard is achieved in the interoperability. Yeah, thanks, Rahul.
Yeah, thank you. So, again, coming to Mohan here. So, Mohan, your organization is both a producer and a consumer of technology, especially on the, testing side, you're a consumer. So, how do your views articulate, and how do you see the testing industry progressing, and where do you feel that industry on the testing side could do much more for you than you currently
Yeah, actually,
using?
any new kind of technology, Rahul, for the 5G, initially when it gets started, there is a lot of apprehensions about the millimeter wave itself at the time. So, by creating the research onto the taking into the field and whatever is working in the lab and going to the field, the test bed is the right method actually. So, in Samsung, we created the test bed based on our understanding about the millimeter wave, and then worked with the ecosystem partners like Verizon, and then provided the test bed deployment with the friendly users and got the feedback. And once we got the feedback, we worked out in the labs, and then from the field we got the data, and then worked with another ecosystem partners like the standardizations, and we work with the Qualcomm and all our partners come together and then make the NR standards. That's where even though you have your own technology, and getting into the standardization is very important. That will reduce the test methodologies itself, but it won't avoid completely. So basically, any kind of implementations point of view, people will try to comply with the standards to meet that whatever it is agreed upon in the 3GPP, and at the same time wanted to give the good experience to the consumers actually. When you talk about the testing related difficulties is involved, for example, dynamic spectrum sharing is one of the great feature introduced in the 5G actually in 3GPP, which will make sure that share the spectrum with the 4G as well as the 5G. So if I focus more on the 5G itself to test that spectrum, I might trouble the 4G consumers itself. So I need to focus more on the 4G also. So it is important to ensure that what kind of dependability is there and what kind of dependent test cases are there. We will work with the test equipment partners, we'll work with the infra vendors, we do the interoperability, and then make sure that in the field, all of the things are working very well, and then we commercialize it. So that's the difficulties are involved.
Absolutely well put, because the 5G is overall an ecosystem play, right? From the equipment manufacturers to the OEMs and to the software providers and even the providers for testing equipment, because nothing can move forward unless you have everything right. Now, I'll take you to Hardeep for a minute. So, for a moment, if you look at it from India, we are transitioning from tech users currently, and the ambition is to go to technology creators going forward. So, from that perspective, how do you see testing play out, and how well are we equipped as a nation on the testing front?
Uh, I think to Mohan's point, I think you start with the process where we start is to look at first, even before standards, to have prototypes. A lot of times, I think this has happened in 5G. We start with prototyping and field testing even before the spec is there. So I think that's the very different way of looking at things than a conventional where standard comes out, then you start prototyping, and then you start into the lab trials, and then you go into field. So I think before even you propose something to the standards, you go to the standards prepared with whether something you are proposing will work, not work. It is field tested. You can do two approaches. You can do simulations, or you can do prototyping and do field testing with the prototype, right? So that's the first phase of it. I think what government did really well this time around, even before the spectrum was auctioned, the spectrum was available to the operators, right? So you had year and a half to play with the technology, try to get a feel of what works, what doesn't work, what settings, whether devices interoperate, what are the challenges, how will my penetration look like. That's another aspect of it. And side by side, the testbed creation, I think, is important. And thing I would want to highlight there is testbeds can be public or government funded or public private, right? So we take an ecosystem approach, and we have been working. If you go to Qualcomm booth, you will see there are very few things which are from Qualcomm. Everything is partner driven, right? So Samsung is a partner, HFCL is a partner, Keysight is a partner. So I think before ecosystem became the buzzword, I think we were the ecosystem believers right from there. So long answer short, I think you have to take this broader approach and enable the broader ecosystem. So we had this test set up in our premises where the startups could come and test what they're doing. How, if 5G has much better throughput latency, they should be able to build new applications, build new use cases. So that's kind of the broad approach.
Absolutely. Follow-up question to that, Deep, you mentioned that very well. So what are the things that we need to do in the next cycle of, technology commercialization?
I think in general, what you want to do is first identify spectrum. I think for telecom, I think spectrum is still going to be the key, right? A lot of times, I think we are driven by what is done in ITU, what is done in 3GPP, but there are markets and regulators which get ahead of even ITU. If I have spectrum available, they will go and allocate spectrum, saying that I am allocating. So US does it, Japan does it. There are a few other geographies who will allocate spectrum ahead. So people have time to play with it, time to get ahead. So by that logic, they know what works, what doesn't work, and then eventually at some point ITU will ratify it, 3GPP will bring in, but there is already a lot of work which has happened. So I would say having early access either right at the finish of the standards, or I would make a claim that you could even do it before even the standards are formed. You could start allocating it as well, and you could allocate it with different set of regulatory environments. You could create test beds, or like you have special economic zones, right? You could have telecom zones where you could test out technologies, right? Because characteristics in India, some of those are very different from characters. Density, we have very high density, we have lot of concrete and brick use, so very different set of characteristics.
Thanks, Adi, for summing it up very well. So I just want to, take it to both Jobi and Mohan. First, to Mohan, what are the, we talked about some of the challenges. So are there any learnings that we can kind of learn from developed countries like, say, US or Japan or Korea, who have done these rollouts ahead of us, and how have they mitigated some of those challenges, or even others that we didn't talk about? So Mohan, over to you first before you go to Jobi.
I think, like I mentioned earlier also, right? So, wireless communications is an ecosystem play right now. Ecosystem play partners, they conform to each other and make the standard, and then take the everybody comply with the standards, and then take it to the market. So challenges are like from the device ecosystem point of view, I think it is getting consolidated, and then very few players are available from the device ecosystem point of view. But the proliferation of network, right? So the virtual RANs and ORAN related standards makes the new players to come into picture. So because of that, it's a good thing. It's a really good thing that many players are coming up, and then coming up with their own innovative solutions. The test bed point of view is like there are so many open source based test beds are getting developed. Many of the academia, I could see that there are test beds are developed, and then they make the certain test by themselves, and then they think that, hey, devices, whoever comply with this standard will work in the day one. But that is a key challenge actually. So it doesn't really make sure that all the standard related work, some of the options we keep it open, so that the people will implement in a different way. For example, in 5G, the key challenge that we faced with the many of the networks and how to deal with the interoperability is that the capability information handling. There are big set of the spectrum, RF spectrums or devices are started supporting it. So the huge capability information message is became very, very huge. So how to deal this capability information message in the network side? The different network vendors is implemented in different ways. So everybody is comply with the standards, but the way it is being interpreted is a different way. So when you do the IoTs, some of the devices are not camping, not registering. So we took some time to do the few weeks of the time to make sure that this is the understanding, and then make sure that devices are connecting to the networks. Yeah. So these are the challenges are involved. So while we are creating the test beds, while we are using the open sources, we have to keep thinking about hey, what kind of interoperability also need to be a matter. So it's early engagement of the chipset vendors like Qualcomm's and Samsung's, and early engagement of the device vendors will make sure that these mistakes will not get repeated.
Yeah, because you're not operating alone ultimately.
Yeah,
it has to operate as a part of an overall ecosystem.
Yeah.
So, Jobi, from you also, any specific learnings that we should do? Because while we are kind of late for 5G, but anything beyond, what could we kind of learnings we could take from developed markets to accelerate the proliferation?
I think the vision is what you are asking, right? So I think in the journey of 2G to 5G, what we have seen is connecting people to connecting things. So as I already mentioned, the enhanced mobile broadband, this URLLC, and the MMTC is going to be the key pillars of or key vectors of this. But when we move forward, I think we are going to have Another three more vectors added into the 6G. Like as we all know that we are going to open up in 6G, we are going to open up the sub-terahertz spectrum. So when it's going to open up, we all know that this spectrum can be used for even sensing. So even currently we are using that. So sensing is another vector we will be adding in 5G. And another thing is you can see many of the operators in the world, they are very, very power hungry. Like our network is really using a lot of power. So low energy will be another key, like sustainability is one key. And another one is like in 6G is going to be like greater coverage and trustworthiness, like security. So that's kind of ubiquity, you can say. So this is like another three more vector is going to add, and all these things will be working on AI. So you can imagine the complexity of the things going to come up. So the AI and the learning algorithm is going to work. So this is what it is. So we are going to connect. Next, we are going to connect human world with using the sensing, all those things, and then physical world like machines, like using digital twins, and then with the digital world. So human, physical, and digital world is going to connect, and we are going to say that 6G will be like connecting everything intelligent, intersecting all the human, physical, and the digital world. Yeah, this is what things.
Thank you for. So one question I'll have to, for last question to you, Subhas, before we go for concluding remarks. One of the things that get missed out in this whole ecosystem is scaling. And with the kind of demands that we are projecting, the kind of growth we are projecting, and a lot of skills will be needed because it's a high precision industry at the end of the day. And how do you develop those skills, and how do you kind of nurture those skills? Because without scaling, you obviously maybe you may probably create capacity on the testing side of it, but you'll probably run out of human capital to be able to operationalize that. So what are your views on top of that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Today, I think all of my co-panelists can say that getting the right talent at the right time to make sure that we can do the product on time is absolutely, absolutely critical. Now, in this, I think there are two type of talent we need. One is a set of thinkers who can think and solve the problem. And another set of people who are the doers who do a really, really good job. Now, if you really look at 5G wireless as a technology, it's a very complex technology. Starting from, say, from my experience over last little over a year, I have been trying to build the products from scratch, the hardware build, everything. Now, when I have to build a team, when I joined HFCL, I was just one man in Bangalore trying to build that team. Of course, we brought a couple of them. Now, I have to define the specification of a RU, I have to define the specification of a integrated small cell, the set of routers. How do I really go about doing all of that right? That is the first question. And unless you can pick up the people, it gets very difficult. So what we realized is that while you can try to get the best people from the industry, it may not always happen. And then in India, one of the ecosystem problem is India probably has created a lot of doers and not too many people who really can define the specification well, right? So it's a process, I think, right? So in terms of doing, and I think Suresh is sitting, he can really say that creating the technology is a long journey. So when you are going from 5G to 6G, it is a 10-year journey, right? And a product specification also is similar in nature. So that we have to get it right. The second part that I see really is once you have the specification, how do you break it into the subsystem level? So I'll just give you an example. We are just in our booth, we have a macro radio. And the learning curve has been really, really stiff. So we started a ORAN 7.2 compliant radio that takes the ECPRI as an interface in the front hall. So you process this front hall messages, give it a low physical layer baseband processing part, which does the low-fi processing in terms of taking that information, doing IFFT, do this and send it to the antenna. Now, before it goes to the antenna, you have a 40 watt of power to be delivered. And then when you power that, send that much of power, and it's a 8 by 8 MIMO beamforming antenna, there's a lot of technology goes on. How do you really do the beamforming? How do you do the beam optimization? In the nanosecond level, how do you make sure timing integrities are done? How do you make sure the delay profiles are done? And these are really the characterization becomes very challenging. And just talking about, let's say I do the beamforming, how do I validate? That becomes an issue. Now, inside the lab, you can do the conducted test, but you do not know how it will be behaving into the field. So connecting to some of the point earlier, I think both Hardeep and Jobi was making that, and even Mohan, you talked about, is that early access of the spectrum and allowing to go out of the lab and into the field and do the characterization. While 3GPP specs 38901 propagation model is there, you use that in theory, use some simulator, but when you go to the field, the characteristics are different. Right? So while we have done the, I would say that lab version of the product, these things will really refine in terms of, so creating these talents, just coming back to your original question, is I think a collaborative approach is very necessary, right? So for example, I have technology partners, Hardeep talked about, we have partnered with Qualcomm for some of the silicon. You have a set of SDKs, right? But on top of that, there are complex algorithms to be developed. So that is where we also collaborate with academia, and then also engage with the ecosystem who are good at giving the foundational training and then subject them through hands-on. So I can tell you that last 1 year has been a combination of a lot of tutoring and collaborating across layers, because the RF is one area, analog domain, but the real processing, for example, the channel selective fading because of the wideband is present, and nonlinearity kicks in for the power amplifier. How do you correct that? So tuning the DPD CFR algorithm without getting too much technical about it, it takes time. So it's a process, Rahul. I think for India, I think this test bed has given an impetus. But to transform this just doers to thinkers and doers to create product, I think it is a journey.
Thank you, sir. Very artist. So, you said 5G to 6G journey is going to take 10 years, but what Mr. Modi wants it to be done by 2030. So, it's shortening a journey already. So, with this, I request Hadeep, your concluding remarks from you, and at least 2 steps that you think will take the industry forward.
Sorry, you will have to
So I
repeat.
said, I said, concluding
Take it
remarks
little
from
closer, I
concluding remarks from you, and at least 2 steps that you believe will take the industry forward.
Sure. I think overall, I think if I can summarize it on everybody's behalf, I think ecosystem, I think, is something everybody agrees on. So it has to be wide collaboration between industry, academia. Within industry, there are multiple segments. You have RAN vendors, you have device vendors, you have application providers. Everybody has to come together. There is no doubt. I think going back to Subhash's point, we have very large, I think just Qualcomm, between the people on this dais itself, and there are a lot of others, right? So we have very large workforce who understands now technology, and we are growing. I think that's a very significant thing, right? When you start designing products, you have to get into nitty-gritties of what works, what doesn't work. That gets you the skill and the resources up in terms of availability. And beyond that, the next step is when you start developing products, you start thinking about what else can I do? That's when you go back in technology cycle saying that, can I innovate? Right? So I think we are starting with every generation, we are closing the gap in terms of from standardization to commercialization. And I'm hoping with the next cycle, we will be either ahead of the standardization cycle or at least be in step.
Thank you, Hadeep. You very well summed up. And with this, we come to the end of day 2.
I have one point
Yeah,
additional
absolutely,
to that
absolutely.
skilling thing actually. I think we talked about, Subhash and Harpreet and Jobi has also talked about how we do the in-house skilling, and how to make sure that how this 5G is reducing, or the wireless communication generation is reducing the gap between the standardization and then the commercialization. But I feel that the fresh engineers in academia, 5G test bed creation is created an opportunity for them to learn the wireless communications, and by engaging or accommodating with the industry, with the academic institutes, it will give the practical exposure for those particular engineers. So once they get graduated, they are very good communication engineers. That's what I'm seeing it, and I'm able to utilize them. And like Subhash mentioned, creating the technology is in the role. I mean, it may happen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I said it was in line with what the telecom minister said today, that he wants industry support academia, and he said it's not government doesn't want checks from you, but what we want from you is the support that you can build at least 100 labs and at least turn 20 of them into incubators, to propagate technology further. That's quite in line with what you said. So absolutely wonderful having you on board, and I think Jobi sir, you have three very engaged and informed customers, and I hope this panel not only brings a convergence of thoughts, but further expansion into business propositions that we have over there. Absolutely wonderful to have all of you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure is mine.